As markets fall once again and The Economist gives the collapse of the euro at least a 40% chance, the situation we find ourselves in is one where appeasement and submission to the policies of an unaccountable Brussels have sunk us into a difficult yet avoidable reality. There are alternatives, and here to discuss them are Yvan Blot, who is currently one of France's top civil servants and a former MP and MEP in Sarkozy's UMP, and author of a popular book on direct democracy. Timo Soini, leader of the True Finns Party and chairman of the Finnish Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee, Fine Gael TD Pascal Donoghue, and Brian Carney, editorial page editor of the Wall Street Journal Europe and co-author of the book Freedom Inc. If you'd like to comment on the programme, you can text us at 53131, placing the word tonight before your comment, or send us a tweet at #vinb, or email us at tonight@tv3.ie. Brian, I'd like to go to you first. You're sitting over there in London, editing the Wall Street Journal, watching one plan after another come from Sarkozy or the ECB or wherever. Is it working?
If it was working, we wouldn't still be talking about it, Declan. Merkel and Sarkozy had their latest idea this week. The ECB has been buying up the bonds of Italy and Spain like crazy, and this crisis just still seems to keep getting deeper because I don't think anybody has answered the fundamental problem, which is we've got countries in Europe that overborrowed and can't pay their bills.
And Timo, you came out of an election in Finland with a very large number of seats. The government was formed in June. You were asked to join that government. You were offered the role of either to be Minister of Foreign Affairs or Minister of Finance. You declined those. Why did you decline those roles?
Because practically the condition to go into the government was to accept the bailouts. And the bailouts is not functioning. And we have seen it in Greece once, in Ireland, suspicious, Portugal, and now we have another Greek package. And ECB is buying the bonds of Italy and Spain. We have money, but we have no program. And it would have been the price of love to get rid of your principles and be in the black car, and I couldn't do that.
So you won all of these seats. You had a landslide victory. You're the largest and most popular. Well, you're the most popular party in Finland, and you walked away from power rather than accept these bailouts. Let me ask, Yvan, you're one of France's top civil servants. Is that unusual behaviour from a politician in Europe?
Not at all. I must say not at all, because politicians are always very interested in becoming a minister in a government, naturally. It's a part of the career. When we are member of the parliament, you want to become a minister. That's a tradition.
And you're not a minister, but you have been an MP,
yes.
in the French parliament, and you've been an MEP, and now you're a civil servant. Where did you have more power? When you were a French MP, when you were a member of the European Parliament, or now as one of France's senior civil servants? Which is the most powerful position?
It's very clear for me. I have more power now as a civil servant than when I was member of Parliament. In fact, in France, you know, the laws are prepared in the offices of the civil servants. And they sell their bills to the ministers. And when the ministers agree, the minister order to the members of parliament, you have to vote this law, to the majority, naturally. So, in fact, the hierarchy is completely different in the reality than in the theory. In the theory, you have the ministers, and you have the members of parliament, and afterwards you have the civil servant. In fact, it's not the case at all. Not the case at all.
So have you ever authored a bill and just had it passed through parliament as a civil servant that, say, you couldn't have passed as an MP?
Yes, it was the case. Last year, for instance, I wrote a bill who was passed by the government and by the parliament. It was not the case when I was a member of the parliament at all. The system, in fact, in all the Western countries, perhaps with only one exception, which is Switzerland, in fact, the civil servants are governing the system. And for instance, you spoke about the agreement between Mrs. Merkel and Mr. Sarkozy. In fact, they have presented an agenda which was prepared by the civil servants. In fact, the civil servants said you have to raise a new tax, financial tax, and you have to develop new meetings. That's typical from civil servants.
Pascal, is it different here in Ireland, or does this sound like a familiar story to you?
Well, it is different in Ireland. I mean, if you look at the new government that are in place at the moment, they developed a set of political priorities that they're now doing their best to implement in office. I'll give 3 examples in relation to this. The first one was in relation to our stance on the renegotiation of the bailout programme. The second will be in relation to the implementation of a jobs initiative early in the new term in office. And the third one will be the Taoiseach's recent intervention in relation to our relationship with the Vatican. I mean, they're areas that were politically determined, that went in front of the people, that the elected politicians made a decision on, they acted upon it, and then the civil servants followed. And even in my own short experience in the Oireachtas, in my first term as a senator, I mean, I saw changes being made to legislation. I got a number of changes made to bills myself, even as an opposition member, that were fundamentally different to the piece of legislation that was drafted.
I want to bring you back because you raised an interesting point. You said that you fulfilled the mandate that you had from the electorate to renegotiate the bailout. I must have missed that. When did that happen?
Well, you didn't miss it at all. It happened a number of weeks ago. We laid down a priority in relation to our country accessing a lower interest rate, and that, as you well know, was delivered.
And so this was this was a positive thing.
Well,
this has stopped the bailouts of banks
anything
in Europe?
that has the ability to save the state between 8 and 900 million euro, I'm sure even you would admit is a good thing. What we're very conscious of is the further change that does need to be made to ensure any programme like this is sustainable. But if you look at where Ireland stands at the moment, Ireland is currently accessing funding via this programme, which I want to go back to in a moment, at 3.5%.
Okay.
Today, can I just make this point? Today, if you're in Italy or if you're in Spain, they're accessing funding now at 5%. So we're accessing funding at 3.5%, whereas 2 other major European countries are accessing us at a higher rate than us.
It's not working. It's clearly not working. I don't know if you've noticed what's happened to the markets today, but it doesn't appear to be working, at least to me. Brian, you're sitting there at the Wall Street Journal in Europe. You're watching this happen. Is it? Well, you've already said it isn't working. Pascal seems to think that this is good news right now, what's going on for Ireland, that this is the best policy. While not asking you to comment specifically on Irish government, you're free to if you wish. Is there any possibility that Pascal is correct in this?
Well, clearly it is better if you're going to borrow tens of billions of euros to pay 3.5% than to pay 5% or 6% or 5.8%. So paying a lower interest rate is better. But the whole concept of the bailouts was misbegotten in the first place. And the euro, as I'm sure people know, was founded on a promise that countries would not be bailed out. And as Christine Lagarde, the former finance minister of France and now the head of the IMF, told me last December, she said, we broke all the rules to save Greece. Greece doesn't look very safe to me, but that's how she put it. And then they did it again with Ireland, and they did it again with Portugal. What they've done is they've lent these countries hundreds of billions of euros, basically in order to make sure that banks and other investors who have lent them money don't suffer losses. And so, yes, it's better for Ireland to pay a lower interest rate on the money that they're borrowing to pay off bankers. But the question, in my mind, that this government should be asking, and taxpayers especially should be asking, is why is Europe giving these governments money in the first place to pay off bankers who made a bad bet, who lent money to companies in the case of Ireland or governments in the case of Greece that simply can't afford to pay that money back?
And when we look, Timo, at now we have this proposal for the ESM, our government, one of Pascal's, the ministers in Pascal's party, Michael Noonan, signed an agreement on Ireland's behalf agreeing to change the Lisbon Treaty to add the massively expensive European Stability Mechanism. Is the European Stability Mechanism something that you are going to support?
No, of course not, and it will be the bill will come to the Finnish Parliament late in the autumn, we will oppose it. But if the elite of the Europe or Eurocrats want to have a fair game, they said that let's have a referendum on this, and that would be a good place to test that what the real people who are paying the bill have something to say about this. And this mechanism, it's a huge transformation of power from unelected technical kind of machinery, and that is very worrying, because they are totally, you cannot put them on trial, you cannot get rid of them, and you are giving your power to the unelected bureaucrats, and that is dangerous.
Ivan, I remember some years ago that you were, I think when you were an MEP at the time, in fact you were instrumental in moving forward a proposal to lower the tax rate for small businesses in France, but you failed in getting it through at the final hurdle. What happened?
I made an agreement with the minister, who was Mr. Chavan, Minister for Small Business, and to have a tax cut, yes, in favor of small business. And during the night we had a session to vote the bill. We voted the first article, second article, and so on and so on. And at once a little man came in the parliament, in the room where we were voting, and he said he was not a member of parliament at all, but he came in and he said...
Was he a civil servant?
He was a civil servant.
Okay, sorry. Yeah.
And he said to the minister, to Mr. Chavan, I order you not to put to vote this tax cut, because the Minister for Financial Affairs is against it. And I note you don't control your members of parliament. You don't control your members of parliament. It's incredible, because the separation of powers, in theory. You don't control your members of parliament. We will speak on this issue next week. And he came back. He was very angry. He left the room. And I said, Mr. Chavan, but we will vote naturally. It's on our agenda, this tax cut. And he told me, I cannot, it's impossible. I received this order from this civil servant, so I am minister, but I cannot put this on the agenda now, so we will not vote this proposal. It's not possible.
It's amazing. Who was this civil servant?
This civil servant, I can say his name.
And where is he now? Was he fired for this?
No, I know him very well. His name is Daniel Bouton. He has been afterwards.
Where is he? Is he still a civil servant?
No, he's head of the big bank in France, Société Générale. He was banker afterwards.
He's just got that bit more famous.
Pascal, this is interesting, Pascal, because Société Générale, where this very powerful
of which there's no prospect of me going to.
Well, I'll tell you, there may be no prospect of you going to it, but certainly your party has sent billions of our money in Société Générale's direction and of taxpayers' money as you bailed them out with taxpayers' money when a commitment was made by particularly your partners in government, the Labour Party, who said Frankfurt's way or Labour's way. Enda Kenny, Michael Noonan have clearly not had the courage to stand up for us. And doesn't it seem that the CEO of Société Générale, who's very accustomed to going around giving orders to elected politicians not to do things, has given you your marching orders, and you are marching to their tune?
Declan, we don't need lectures from you on political courage. And I want to make two points in relation to this.
You certainly don't
need
lectures from me, but you need to manifest
the point that Timo made there about
these
decisions being made by unelected bureaucrats. They're made by the Council, the European heads of state, their European Council, directly elected by their own people. The second question for people who are opposing this bailout, and let's be clear, Ireland does not want to be in a bailout. I don't want to be in a bailout. Other people don't want to be paying for a bailout, as Timo's making the point here.
Is Europe now the coalition of the unwilling,
at the moment,
Pascal? Is that what we are?
We need, independent of the banking debt that we're being forced to manage by the previous government, we have 15 billion euro of this year. 15 billion euro, Declan, that we need to borrow to pay for our hospitals and schools that nobody else is going to lend us.
Would you
so if
have
people
agreed,
are saying that
Pascal,
Ireland should not be in the bailout, the question they have to ask is, where will we get the 15 billion euro to keep our schools and hospitals open?
You just tried to blame the previous government for this. I distinctly remember you defending the decision to make the bailouts, to pursue these bailouts. I remember you doing it on Twitter.
Oh, thank you.
If you, and you deleted those tweets subsequently.
No, I did not.
If you,
I didn't realise you followed my tweetings with such interest.
If there was a dialogue between us at the time,
which I enjoyed.
If you were in government back then, would you have agreed to the bailouts, or were the bailouts a mistake? A yes or no answer would be fine.
The precise point I made was the fusion of our banking and sovereign debt was wrong. The question that I've asked in return is, if we leave this bailout, and I've made clear we don't want to be in it, where will we get the 15 billion euro we need this year to pay for our public services?
Pascal, I don't mean
what would the consequence of that action be?
I don't mean to
Would you give it to us, Declan?
Pascal, I don't mean to be rude, but if you could answer my question, would you have agreed to these bailouts?
I would not have agreed to the bailout on those terms.
So you would not have agreed
on
to the
those terms.
So the bailouts
and that's
were
why
a mistake.
our government went in and renegotiated
the bailouts were a mistake.
I've given you an answer, and I'll repeat it. We would not have agreed to the bailout on those terms, which is why our government renegotiated it, which is why we looked for a lower interest rate, which is why we looked for the ability to implement a new budget, which is why we looked for the agreement to extend the maturity of our debt. The bailout terms were wrong. We looked to change them, and we did. The key question still remains
it's window dressing.
That nobody will lend to our state at a rate that we can afford, and it is the least worst choice that we have at our disposal while we get our house in order.
So, Timo, it seems that, and I know that this is something that is the argument that Pascal is making, is an argument that we hear very widely across Europe, that there is no choice, that this is the least worst situation, that at least if we are not a coalition of the willing in Europe, maybe we're a coalition of the unwilling, but we must do this. Is that fair?
No, of course, it's if we would have had a world without any opposition or without options, that would be a dictatorship, and that is not the correct case. For example, Argentine, when it has the crisis, it was IMF who went there, and it should have been IMF solely to the European debt crisis. What on earth European Union is functioning on this level, making us to break the rules of ourselves, Constitution 1, 2, 3, paragraph 1, 2, 5 paragraph, and
which Brian's earlier point.
That is Brian had absolutely the point at the beginning. We are breaking our own rules, and then we have that growth and stability back, who was actually quite sensible thing, and then Germany and France themselves broke it, and now we are in a way allowing European Central Bank to break their own rules by the bonds of Italian and Spanish. And how would now, when we are making a new mechanism, first enlarging the temporary one and then creating a permanent one, why should we believe that these are the rules which are obeyed? And that is the problem. If there is no law which is people following, the law is in vain.
Brian, you wanted to come in.
By democratically elected politicians.
Brian, you wanted to come in there.
Yes, because Timo makes a fundamental point, which is when you've got a union, when you've got a single currency, these institutions have to be governed by law, right? Rule of law is fundamental to our Western way of life. And so that means when politicians, democratically elected or not, step in and without democratic process, right? There are procedures for, say, amending the Constitution or the Lisbon Treaty, but nobody elected Christine Lagarde or anybody else to rewrite the rules that are in the Constitution. The Irish people approved the Lisbon Treaty in all their wisdom. I'm not going to prosecute that war right now. on the second vote, but they did approve it. They did not approve Christine Lagarde or anybody else's decision to tear up those rules that still said no bailouts, that still said that the ECB has to behave in certain ways. Those politicians cannot take the rules that were passed by the people of Ireland and the rest of Europe, whether they should have been or not in the first place, and say, well, there's a crisis, so now we're going to do it ourselves. And the point I wanted to make about that, Declan, is that this is not just about whether this is wise or not in itself. We can debate that till the cows come home. But it's also about the fact that investor confidence rests in part on investors' confidence that the rules that are going to be respected. And if you want people to be willing to lend Ireland money, lend Italy money, lend Greece money, investors have to know that the rules that were in place when they lent that money are going to be respected down the road. The real contagion here, it seems to me, in Europe, is a contagion of lawlessness, as it were, a contagion of breaking rules serially.
I want to come to Ivan for a moment. Ivan, it's interesting because Christine Lagarde was brought up. She's your minister, a member of your party. Now, of course, she's gone to the IMF. Do we need mechanisms, democratic mechanisms, to bring these things closer to the people so that people like your former finance minister can't just run off and change the rules on people?
I'm sure. I would not blame so much the politicians because the system is not good. The political institutions are no longer adapted to our situation now. The only country where you have a little debt, little taxes and a very good financial situation is Switzerland. Why? Because Switzerland is the only country where the people have the power to control the politicians.
By the direct democracy system that they have in Switzerland?
Because of the direct democratic system. That's, for instance, if the government of Switzerland decides tomorrow to create a new tax, the parliament will say, okay for this new tax, but afterwards, during 3 months, people have the possibility to collect signatures, and it will make a referendum on this new tax, and the people can say we don't want this tax. It was the case for the value-added tax in Switzerland 3 times. 2 times people said we don't want this tax at all because it will give too much power to the politicians.
And so the people get to decide through a series of, I'll call them mini referendums on what policy is, and then the politicians implement those policies. But don't you just get a whole bunch of referendums one after the other? Has that been a problem for Switzerland?
We can see at the good situation of Switzerland, it's not a problem to have direct democracy. Okay. I think the problem is not to have a direct democracy. In the United States, for instance, you have 50 states. Half of the states have direct democracies, that is West Coast states. Right. And half of them have no direct democracy, that's the East Coast. And there is very good academic studies who show that in the Western Coast, taxes are 1/3 lower, public expenses are 1/3 lower, and debts are 1/2 lower than on the East Coast.
Okay, so what happens is that people get to rein in the civil servants, and politicians get to do what they're supposed to do, which is implement a competition
between the politicians and the people. And competition is always a good thing, I think.
Pascal, you've been dying to come in.
I mean, what our colleague is describing there is participative democracy, and we live in a representative democracy. And I mean, 2 points that I'd make here is that I think an interesting argument is developing where we complain about people who aren't elected making decisions, and then when politicians that are elected make decisions that people don't like, we say they're not elected either and they don't have any legitimacy. I mean, Chancellor Merkel was elected, President Sarkozy was elected. And can I make one final point in relation to the euro area performance? Which, understandably, there's a lot of pessimism and gloom about at the moment. But if you look at the euro debt performance at the moment, the euro area has a deficit of 4% of national income. America is 9.9. The UK is 9.1.
Pascal, on the issue of representative democracy, isn't it galling when Fine Gael, for example, will go out and tell the people of Ireland that they will get jobs and recovery in return, for example, for voting yes in the Lisbon II referendum, which clearly and manifestly was a lie. Doesn't that undermine the credibility of politics and of politicians? Aren't you ashamed to have been associated with telling a lie like that to the Irish people and now seemingly shamelessly conducting policies which are not going to bring about the jobs and recovery that you promised 2 years ago?
Well, you can ask if I'm ashamed. I can contest that and say I'm not. I'm proud of the role we played.
You're proud of the yes for jobs and recovery.
Just look at our record there. We went out there on bus. Our side of the argument forward in the Lisbon referendum.
Where are the jobs?
And the second one, we got elected to government a year and a half later.
Where are the jobs?
Now, well, what I point to is the jobs we've kept and the jobs we're going to create.
Where are the jobs that you promised? The jobs and recovery, where are they?
I have no doubt at all that by the end of our term in office,
Pascal, where are the jobs?
we go in front of the people on our record, we will point to the jobs that we've created.
And the recovery.
And we will point to the recovery that's happened.
Did you know how you were going to get it back then when you promised it?
We just started off this programme here with some leading economists saying there are signs of growth within our economy. Now, I'm not going to say that we're on the road to immediate growth or stability. We know there's a rocky road ahead, but the government is taking steps to try and accelerate that progress. And as we talked already, we do live in a representative democracy and we'll go to the people and they can either keep us or get rid of us. It'll be their choice.
Timo,
we had a very bad banking crisis in Finland 1991 to 1995. Nobody bailed us out. We really got hit and it was really bad things happened. But that was the true way to recovery, step by step. You got responsible for your errors as a nation and really bad things happen. But this is a moral hazard. Somebody else is making the mistakes and the people of AAA countries and the taxpayers of those countries are called to help. And now there is an outcry of solidarity to the European Union. What about the solidarity to the own voters who have voted for you, who have said
What happened to social welfare payments in Finland and that, after that banking crisis?
Of course,
what happened?
We went seriously in
How
debt.
much did you cut them by?
Pascal,
yeah, we did.
No, I want to hear an answer to this,
we did.
because he's advocating a course of action.
Yeah.
He wasn't in government.
No, but he's applauding the course of action that was taken there. So how much did social welfare payments go down by?
It was really bad things happening. I don't remember the figures. It was 15 years ago, and we were in.
Did they go down?
The whole thing was collapsing. But
how much did incomes go down
let me answer. It would be polite to give me a word when I'm trying to answer you. So bad things happen. Those people who had made bad mortgage, developed the real estate, they hit the worst. And then, of course, the ordinary people had to lose their jobs because of these wrongdoings. But now, when there are governments and nations who have overdebt themselves, and now there is an outcry of us to come and subsidize it, and that is that we are going to make enormous risks to bail somebody out. I think it's completely our right to say no, but guess not. We are saying that it is a unanimous decision required throughout European Union. What do you think is the pressure? The whole thing to get done with Finnish people. What is our chance to say no? What is our democratic chance to say no?
One of the things that's been commented on is the lack of leadership. I have said that there is a tyranny of mediocrity in European leadership right now, that plans that work aren't being put on the table. Are we bringing into politics in France and elsewhere people of the calibre that can lead at times like this?
That's a real problem because of the process of selecting personalities to put them in politics. In France, I can more speak about France. I know the situation in France. I remember a committee, I was member of a selection committee with Mr. Chirac to nominate a candidate for the town of Lyon, to become mayor of Lyon, the second town in France. And Mr. Chirac told us, well, we have two candidates possible. We have a businessman, Mr. Mérieux, who is very rich and with a lot of energy. But Mr. Mérieux is very rich, so very independent, and for the party, it's not a good thing, I would say. And if he becomes mayor of Lyon, he will have a better career, and he will be probably, he will want to become president of the Republic, so in competition with me.
So who did Chirac pick as the candidate?
And Chirac said, we have another candidate, Michel Noir. Michel Noir, we know him, he is not rich, so he depends on you, on the party, I mean, so it's better for the party. And secondly, his intelligence, well, you know his intelligence. And another member of the committee, Mr. Pasqua, said, well, it is, Michel Noir is very good for Lyon. We need for this town a car with a little motor, but with a big appearance. That is Michel Noir. I thought it's better. And this sort of committee is very bad, I think, in the long run, because you choose always people who are not too much independent, not too much intelligent, because they can become your enemy afterwards. So you prefer to have...
So crush the talent. Well, we have to move on. We'll have more discussion along with a preview of tomorrow's newspapers after the break. Welcome back. We have a number of the Irish papers in here with us today. Tonight, the Irish Daily Mail leads with Quinn, time we stood up to Sarkozy. Somebody must have been watching. The Irish Sun leads with Robbie's Intergalactic, Yes We Cane. The Irish Times leads with Europe's markets plummet in worst trading over 2 years, and also a piece on Morgan Kelly, who says cost of mortgage forgiveness not enormous, causing for mortgage forgiveness. If we can bail out Europe's banks, perhaps we can bail out some Irish mortgage holders being advocated there. The Irish Examiner, $6 billion bailout for home loans will end crisis. Again, the Morgan Kelly story. And on the Irish Independent, how Quinn is ignoring our maths scandal. Minister lacks key facts to tackle crisis. Thousands of new pupils face old problem. And then the Irish Daily Star leads with married a day after meeting, romance bloomed on dating website. And the Wall Street Journal Europe, with Brian here as our guest, not a regular feature on TV3, but perhaps that can change. Leads with slowdown worries slam stocks, some very red indices there showing the collapse in the markets. Brian, you edit newspapers, I don't. What do you make of the Irish media's approach to the news tomorrow morning? Well,
I was struck that we had Quinn saying we have to stand up to Sarkozy alongside the story about the unqualified math teachers. You know, at first I said, good for Quinn, and then I said, well, maybe he's just trying to change the subject because he's the education. I mean, you know, he's a good economist and a smart guy, but maybe he would rather not talk about his own portfolio. But that said, it's nice to see somebody saying that people should stand up to Sarkozy. Sarkozy, of course, would love to railroad Ireland into raising its corporate tax rate, which would be economic suicide. So Quinn's right on the merits there as well.
What do you make of Morgan Kelly's call there?
You know, the Irish mortgage forgiveness regime is one of the harshest in the Western world. And in America, a lot of mortgages are what are called no-recourse loans, which means if you default on your mortgage, they get your house, but they can't touch you for anything else, and you walk away from the debt. And it's the bank's problem to sell the house and try to get as much money back as they can. The Irish regime is particularly hard to get out from under if you find yourself underwater on your mortgage. And though I haven't read all of the story and I haven't read all of Kelly's argument, the principle seems sound to me that if we can bail out the investors who invested in these banks, why can't we give a little aid to the people who are trapped under their own debt here for houses that are now worth a fraction what they paid for them?
And Pascal, you know I'm coming to you. What do you think of the Morgan Kelly news that's breaking?
I think this is something the government has to look at. I think the main challenge in all of it is how do you distinguish between people who can't pay their mortgage and some people who won't pay their mortgage. And coming up with a system to do that is essential. Just on a lighter note, the newspaper that caught my eyes was the Irish Sun, where Robbie Keane has arrived over to the LA Galaxy team. And apparently he was greeted by a large number of adoring Americans who were chanting, "We all dream of a team of Robbie Keanes." So it's perhaps no wonder that he's given his wife such a hug upon landing. That's the sight that greeted him.
Fantastic. And Timo, I see you looking at your favourite English language newspaper, perhaps the Daily Mail, and the Sarkozy story. Does that give you any encouragement?
It should be, and for example, I was thinking and wondering where was the Finnish taxpayer when Sarkozy and Merkel make the footsteps how to go forward. I was very anxious to have where was our chair, where was our representation?
Is it the same place that ours was, which was outside the room? And preferably on a beach, I think.
I think so, and this is really annoying because they say that the European Union is protecting the small countries. They protect ours so well that we are protected even of using our voice.
Ivan, is there a case for Ireland, Finland, some of the smaller countries in Europe to start shaking things up and really calling for a democratic Europe, a Europe that listens to its citizens? Do you think that if we start pulling together more tightly, that maybe we can get listened to, maybe we'll be invited back into the room?
Perhaps it's difficult to say, but I think little countries have perhaps now the occasion to ask a reform of the European Union, because the European Union system is not a good one. We spoke. I was 10 years member of the European Parliament, and I always heard about the democratic deficit, le déficit démocratique in French. But in fact, yes, we have a very big democratic deficit just because the Commission, for instance, the Commission is not a democratic organism.
What was created, used to be called?
At the beginning, it was that Europe was only existed only for coal and for iron. At the beginning, that was the first form of Europe. And at this time, the Commission had a very beautiful name. It was a high authority. High authority, it seemed so authoritarian that they changed the name, and now it's the Commission. But,
that's right.
But this high authority was perhaps a good idea just after the war. But now I think it's not a democratic system. In France, you have no high authority, you have no commission, you have a government and a parliament. In Ireland, you have a government and a parliament. And why? It's not the case for Europe. Government and parliament, it's enough. We must fire the commission, I would say.
Fire the commission. That would make an interesting headline, Brian. Brian, from the Wall Street Journal's perspective, Ireland has been very important these last couple of years. It's been newsworthy.
Yeah, well, you know, the funny thing is, Ireland became important because so much money came into Ireland during the boom that suddenly a lot of banks became very concerned about Ireland's fate after the bust. And that was why, you know, according to at least some people, Brian Lenihan, for example, said that the European Central Bank told him, you cannot impose losses on these investors in Irish banks because the whole European banking system depends on the Irish taxpayer making these banks whole. And this idea that everybody was somehow systemic, right, that losses anywhere in the system were going to cascade out of control, took hold during the crisis, and that made even small countries suddenly loom very large. Of course, the flip side of that is, if it's really true, that ought to mean that small countries should have a lot of influence in how these things are decided, because if the whole system's fate rests on Ireland, then Ireland ought to be at the table.
Timo, you're
very short notice. I take an example. If I go to the horse races and put tenner to number 4, if it does win, I take all the money. And if it doesn't win, I come to here with all of us and say, let's share the burden. This is some moral hazard in this, and it is unacceptable.
Well, I'd just like to end tonight's programme by saying I'm grateful to TV3 for the opportunity to fill in for the legendary Vincent Brown, and to my guests for their contribution, my guests every night, and most of all to you at home for watching. While some of you may know my views, in brief, I call myself a European federalist, but I feel we're heading in the wrong direction, and it's well past time that we stood up for Ireland, which is ultimately in the best interest of all of Europe. That's it for now. For more on tonight's show, log on to tv3.ie. The weather is coming up next, and from us tonight, good night.